I'm very big on acronyms and alliterations, and I wanted to do my brief introduction with these three words: Shoah, silence, and storytelling. My area of interest is storytelling for social justice, which is why I'm so interested in what you're doing. And what philosophers have told us, I mean, Plato himself outlawed the poets, the storytellers, from his perfect democracy. Why? Because he knew that storytelling was so potent, so powerful, that a storyteller could persuade people to do anything. Interestingly enough, of course, Plato told his own stories. That was okay. But he knew, as did Aristotle, as did many of the Greek philosophers, they knew the potency of this rhetorical tool. So you can use this as little or as much as you feel comfortable with, but that's the tool that in your toolbox and in your public speaking toolbox that I'm going to focus on. Storytelling promotes identification. When I tell you a story, as opposed to giving you the facts of my life, as opposed to giving you statistics, what happens is you get a visual. 97% of the population gets a visual image in our minds. If I tell you that I walked down the street and I went to get milk, most of you are going to be with me in your mind, visually. About 3% will get a different kind of an image. You might get an oral image, you might hear something, the traffic going by, you might get some other sensory image, a smell or something else. Most people get visual images. But when I show you a movie, you are making sense of the images I gave you. When I tell you a story, you are taking suggestions of images and you are completing them in your mind. So you're still seeing, it's still highly visual. What I'm here to talk to you about and to work with you on is stories. So you've got that visual. In other words, you've got the content through a visual medium. And so that's first why it's so important, because you're going to remember it because it's visual. That's one thing. You are secondly going to remember it because your emotions, when you hear a story or tell a story, emotions are kindled in some way. So, and again, this was Plato. He said, as we love, so we learn. When our emotions are kindled in an educational experience, we remember better. Now, whether that is a physiological thing with how our brains are, how different lobes of our brains are situated and what is where, or whether it is a biochemical thing, I'm not here to tell you. But it seems that when we are brought to strong emotions in an educational experience, we remember better. So storytelling is good for memory. I'm going to have to erase a little bit of this. Storytelling is good for memory. It's good for connection because we have gone on a journey together. If I tell you about going to meet the survivors for the book that I did for them, the memoir that I did for them, and I tell you about that experience, it's as if you and I took a trip together, right? The journey, I'm your guide, and the journey is in your head. That's extremely powerful. Not only does it empower me as the storyteller, planting images in your head, but it connects us in that, let's see, empowerment and connection. It connects us because we've taken that trip together. Are you familiar with this? Nothing Makes You Free. Melvin Jules Bouquet edited it, Writings by Descendants of Jewish Holocaust Survivors. It's a gorgeous book. He came and spoke years ago. It's not new. So I want to read you a tiny little 3 short paragraphs. Roll call. This is by somebody, this is from a larger piece called Night Father by Carl Friedman. It was written originally in Dutch. He doesn't have count only on his face, but in his fingers too. They often drum nervously on the edge of the table or on the arms of his chair. And he has count in his feet. In the middle of the night, his feet slide out of bed, carrying him down the stairs and through the hallway. We can hear him far away, opening and closing doors without ever finding the peace he's looking for behind any of them. "Were you on the prowl again last night?" my mother asks when we are at breakfast. He nods. She puts her hand over his. "Ephraim," she says. Ephraim, which is, of course, his name. Now, besides the fact that a story, as I just said, has some sort of causal relationship among its parts and has beginning, a middle, and an end, a story also has this. A story has the ability to create a scene in our heads. Was there anybody in this room that did not get some sort of scene of this man? There was so much that did not need to be explained to us. We didn't need to be told because we were shown. So the power of story is not only in its ability to make us feel like we're going on the journey because we've got that all of the stops on the all the major stops on the journey, the plot, but also because we've got the minor but absolutely invaluable details so that we do feel that we were there. We don't need every single detail. We didn't need to know what that man looked like in that little section. Was there anybody here who was not moved by what we just heard? And what moved us, we were not told that he was sad, we were not told that he was miserable, we were just told what he did. And then we drew our own conclusions.
I think, as opposed to just facts, you know, with the Shoah, I mean, it wouldn't have happened if people weren't dehumanized. And I feel like, you know, you can tell somebody who is already distant or already a Holocaust denier or unsympathetic facts that doesn't move them, but a story brings that human connection back. And you know, and what you said about creating in somebody's mind, if you tell them a story that they can see themselves in somebody else's shoes, you know, it creates in their being, you know, an empathy, I would think. I think empathy is probably, yeah.
Very, very important. It's been said that you can't hate somebody once you know their story. You may not be best friends, but you've walked in their shoes. For all the reasons that we've said. And the dehumanization is so important because story does humanize. Numbers, statistics, names of places does not, but story does. Did you have something to say?
No, I was just going to say my mother never spoke, really never spoke, but looking at my mother, looking into her eyes, I created stories for her. And actually when she spoke, when Rose actually did an interview, I knew what she was saying, and she did. She came out and said the guilt that she survived, and I just felt that. And, you know, so the silence, I created the story for my mother, so she spoke.
And, of course, we know that there is no such thing as a totally pure fact. We know that people's perspective differs, you know, amongst 8 to 10 people in a room, their perspective is going to differ. That said, within the same person, the person trying to tell exactly the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth may look at these events differently and remember things differently. We want to make sure that people know that these things actually happened. We want to make, and that they're not fiction. We want to make sure that people know that we have done the best we can to have documentable, verifiable fact. So what happens when we're telling stories if we don't know if the dress was red or blue? What happens if we're telling stories if I hadn't brought in this book, I would have read in the book I did, where it was done, how many of you read Angela's Ashes? So it was done as a memoir as Angela's Ashes, and in other words, short chapters and very vivid scenes. And obviously these people who were in their 80s did not remember if the dress was red or blue. What storytellers say, and this is a difference of opinion and a matter of debate and not necessarily something we'll spend a lot of time on, but something for you to think about. Once you get away from verifiable, documentable fact, you do find yourself in the muddy water of conjecture and memory. And then you might say, well, wait a minute, am I embellishing too much if I say that her hair was in braids and I can't be positive that her hair was in braids or not? So what I say is storytellers, our storyteller's motto is, everything I say may not have actually happened, but everything I say is true.
So when we as children of Holocaust survivors sometimes relate a story, it can be affected by our selective memory.
Absolutely.
At least this is a personal
Absolutely.
comment that I'm making.
Very important. And the idea is, that's okay. If you are not getting up there as historians, you are not getting up there as academics.
As historians.
You are getting up there and telling the story of your family, and that story belongs to you and your family. Or if it wasn't your family, that story belongs to whoever has given you the permission to tell his other story.
My brother remembers things that I don't remember hearing. So that's
Sure, selective memory is very
So
important.
what I was going to say also, like you talked about imagery and, you know, the positive part, on the negative side sometimes what happens is, like, I remember things that I was told, but because I was young, I pieced it together in my mind as a totally different thing. So I could be at home alone or thinking that the Germans are going to knock on the door and steal me or something. You know, I made up this scenario in my head and fit in all these things from the pieces I got that weren't really a factual story, but what I remembered. And I agree with you. That's why eyewitness testimony is not accurate, because our mind fills in the gaps in stories, and after a while we don't know what we filled in and what the truth was.
Memory is very selective,
Right.
and it's very creative.
Mine is a little about how at an early age, like when I realized that maybe my family was not the same as everybody else's family, and my parents spoke Yiddish. So, of course, I learned English, but a lot of times there are certain words that you don't know the English word for, your parents don't, and so you grow up not knowing it. So I was in school, and I used to wear my hair in a ponytail, and to keep the ends from coming out, I would use bobby pins to hold it back. And I was in school, I think it was kindergarten, and my hair was all falling down, and I looked down on the floor because my bobby pins had fallen out, my hair was a mess. So I looked on the floor and I said, "Where's my spinach? Where's my spinach?" And my friends all looked at me like, what is she talking about? And I'm like, I was really upset because I couldn't find my spinach. And then when I found it, I picked it up. And I was so happy that I had it. And every kid was looking at me like, is something wrong with her? And I realized at that moment that the word was not, the word spinach was not what it was. It was a bobby pin, which I had never heard of before. And so I realized that, you know, I do not have the same upbringing as some of these people, because there were words that I just didn't even know in English.
Okay, good. You know, as I said, that a very little bit of what we remember is from content. We remember so much of the visual. We remember so much of the tone. And so this is just like when we are naturally telling a story. We accentuate our words occasionally, not every single thing. We don't say she walked and, you know, we don't go like that. That's ridiculous. But certain ways to accentuate that. Also with your voice, I loved, in this case, she didn't use the Yiddish. She used the accent, which is also extremely interesting to people. And you all, of course, recognize the accent and heard it in all your lives. But even for somebody who has never heard the accent, it is so powerful. So that's another tool that we have. Again, the universal versus the specific. How much do you want to tell to make it not a generic story? You want it to be, you want people to really believe it. You want people to really be captivated and connected. But by the same token, you want people to be able to really believe it. And that's the play.
I think the rules probably change with exactly the information that you want people to know about how much information to give. The message of certain relationships, the message of guilt between parent and child and Holocaust survivors. If you want to talk about that, and you're speaking to an audience, and you're talking about the Holocaust, that's, the specific day, the specific time, the specific this is not really that important. You're not a historian.
I would like to do a coaching session here with you. I'd like to sit around, bring the chairs in a circle over here, and have people tell their stories and go over the few details of coaching ahead of time, okay? Who's Reba? Nobody's Reba except Reba, so don't worry about that.
I'll call my story Irzad's Sunday, because my brother read a poem by that name. And my story is listening to Sunday morning stories that my father used to tell to my brother, and I was very, very young, very young. And I see now that I felt unlucky at that time because I wasn't part of this storytelling. I wasn't part of the story of how my mother and sister were in a house in Warsaw, Poland, and how a bomb came and blew up the house, and how my father was out trying to get water for my sister who was just born, just an infant. And I wasn't there when my father went back to the house and saw rubble and didn't realize that a rescue team had saved my mother and baby infant. My sister was an infant then. And I felt kind of unlucky with that, hearing these stories and feeling that I was not part of this family. I wasn't part of my brother's life because he was born in Germany, a place that wasn't America. I was the Americana, and I was the lucky one. But I was not part of this family because they had all these things that happened to them, and I felt very alone because I didn't understand. I wasn't there, but I knew it was bad. I knew it was sad, and I remember the poem at the end where my brother stated, and everything was always went down the drain. That was the end of the poem, and I didn't understand it, but now I feel very lucky, and I understand. But there were many times in my life that I felt separated, and now I feel very fortunate, and it is still somewhat Arizona.
Okay, tell us what you want. You can also skip a step. Tell us what you'd like.
What I like?
What you would like. Do you want affirmations first, or do you want to skip affirmations and go right to
I'm open to everything.
Okay. Who would like to start with the affirmations?
I would. Your tone was beautiful, and your voice was so gentle, and it was so, we were there with you, like in the struggle and in the beauty that now is. It was just very gentle and very understanding, and I was with you when you were speaking about the struggle and the loneliness, although certainly not with you, but with you, and you just did a really lovely job.
Like your story had a bit of loneliness, the idea of loneliness, and your tone matched the story. It was quite kind of like that lonely, left out feeling, so it went together very well.
But for me, it was also enlightening because I was like, oh, well, that's different. That's like a whole different thing that I never really thought about, that if you had older brothers and sisters that were there and that you really felt left out, that's like a whole other thing that I never realized, and I didn't even know about you, but I felt it, you know, I
Guess
just
what?
felt it.
Because of your exercise, I just realized.
Oh, make sure you get that on tape.
I just realized it.
Yeah,
true. I did.
And you never realized that you felt that way?
That way, but I never could pinpoint it, you know?
Exactly.
Thank you.
All right, well, I thought we were going to end early, but look at this, we could go on for another hour.